The Lecky flat smelled of jasmine and polished teak. Light pooled across marble thresholds and a crystal decanter caught the lagoon like a catcher's net. 4 women sat on a low sofa, cushions of cashmere and velvet arranged with the care of small altars. Their voices were lacquered, measured, refined, and yet as sharp as knives when they chose to be. They spoke of missing sisters and murmured names into the hush between sips of tea that came with gold-rimmed saucers. One name rose again and again, 1 week 2 girls. He was a stranger who walked the private quay in the mornings, a figure in linen and soft words that fit him like a tailored coat. He smiled at visitors who stepped from yachts and left without leaving a trace. They blamed him for the silence that settled over daughters who walked home late. They blamed the city that made empty promises. Ada slept on a thin mat by the window, eyes bright even in the dim. Steph, who kept the flat's small money, grabbed a borrowed dress and pressed it into Ada's hands at dawn. "You will go," Steph said, voice tight. The others leaned toward her and told the plan with hard faces. Jealousy and fear mixed like bitter tea. They wanted truth or revenge, they could not tell which. Ada swallowed. She thought of the far shore and a rumor Steph had offered like a coin. The women packed a small bag for her and tied the borrowed dress with trembling fingers. At dawn they nudged Ada out the door and watched the quay. Ada stepped into the Lecky morning and felt the city breathe on her. The flat lay behind her like a small secret. The borrowed dress felt strange but steady against her skin. She had come to the city with hope and a quiet plan to find steady work. The women rehearsed the steps of their plan behind her: how to catch the stranger's eye, how to pull him back to the flat, how to learn what he kept hidden. Steph walked with Ada, speaking soft so others would not hear. She said the truth as if it weighed heavy. Grief had sharpened their voices and left no patient waiting. Ada felt hope and dread sit at the same table inside her chest. She wanted honest work. She wanted a ticket if the rumor was true. As they passed the quay, the club lights winked and a man in a tidy shirt moved like he did not belong. Steph pointed him out in a hush. He spoke low and smiled easy. Ada's fingers tightened around the small purse Steph had given her. Steph repeated the plan one last time. Sit, smile, speak of school, then bring him back to the flat. Ada nodded. The city rolled on and night held its breath. Ada's memory carried a soft hurt. Her parents had died in a road crash when she was a child. An uncle took them in but never sent her to university. She used to dream of books and late nights with lamps. She loved numbers and science even though she had no chance to study. The Lecky flat had a cracked fan and a window that never shut right, but it had women who kept talking until their anger cooled. Ada had learned to listen and keep small hopes. The loss of her parents had made her steady. She did not make loud plans. She saved small coins in a tin under her bed. When the women argued and blamed the city, Ada felt the weight of things unspoken. She wanted more than revenge. She wanted a way out that did not hurt others. Steph pressed coins into her hand and whispered of a rumor. A ticket, a chance to go to the far shore and study. Ada swallowed. The idea was thin, almost like steam. Still, it warmed her chest. She smoothed the borrowed dress and thought of lamplit study halls. Her life had been pushed aside once. She would not let it end that way again. At dawn she folded her small savings and stepped toward the quay with shoes that had seen better streets. Near the quay the lights made pools on the wet pavement. Emeka moved among the visitors with a practiced soft step. He did not shout for attention. He spoke to waiters and bus drivers as if they were old friends. The women from the flat watched him from a corner and whispered. Rumor had wrapped him in many stories. Some said he gave money to girls and left no trace. Some said he gave tickets and names and then vanished. They tightened their fingers around old grief and new suspicion. Steph watched how he smiled and how he watched others. Jealousy rose with the tide. The plan felt real now: lure him, learn his secrets, and find out if he had taken daughters into silence. Ada stood beside Steph, heart beating like a small drum. She wondered if the stranger knew pain, if he handled gifts with care or cruelty. The women in the flat had lost more than they could name, and grief had made them sharp. Steph put a hand on Ada's shoulder and declared the night would change things. They would not wait for answers. Tonight they would draw him to the flat, she said, and see what lay in his chest. Ada stepped into the club by the quay with the borrowed dress and a steady step. The music thumped and the air felt heavy with perfume. She sat where she could see the door and the guests. Emeka sat at a table near the lamps, his hands calm, his voice a low wind. He talked of small things at first: school, work, where a person's steadiness comes from. He listened as if he heard more than words. Ada kept the plan folded in her bag like a paper bird. She answered where she could, hiding the flat's aim behind polite smiles. He asked about her schooling and where she learned to read late at night. Ada spoke of small books and borrowed lamps and a hunger to learn. Emeka spoke of being taught to give carefully, to know who needed and who pretended. His voice made heat where she expected only danger. At the end of the night he left a small brass token on the napkin, a simple maker's mark like a family stamp, and said he would like to see her again. Ada folded it into her palm and felt something shift. She walked home with a lighter step and the token pressed to her heart, the plan moving forward and her heart uneasy. The Lecky flat hummed when Ada returned, the women wide-eyed at the brass token. They sat in a circle and touched it with fingers that had seen too little kindness. The plan took shape again, a careful thing with edges. They would lure him, they would bring him in, and if his papers held secrets they would read them. Ada felt the token's cool weight and thought of the far shore it might open. The women told stories of daughters who had left and never written. They spoke of the hush that followed, of quiet rooms and empty beds. Each tale sharpened the plan. Steph pressed a small contact note into Ada's hand and told her to bring Emeka to the flat when he next asked. "We will ask him to be plain," Steph said, "and if he does not, we will find out what he hides." Ada's heart beat in long, careful strokes. She worried for the woman who had walked away without word. She worried for herself too. But the brass token rested like a key. That night the women whispered names into the dark and folded their hopes like cloth. They would not be quiet watchers anymore. They would make the stranger show his hands. Emeka drank at a small inn near the quay and fell into sleep like someone who trusted the world too much. The women watched him from a doorway, eyes sharp. They waited until his breathing slowed, then they moved like shadows. At first they bound him with soft ties, not wanting to hurt him, but the fear in their chests made their hands quick. They found a satchel at his feet and opened it with fingers that trembled. Inside were things that sounded like a life. A sealed envelope with a ticket addressed to a student, loose notes, and a small ledger filled with initials and numbers. The brass token lay there, calm as if it had not mattered. Ada unmasks him in a voice that shakes. "Why did you take their daughters?" she asks, and the room waits for the answer like a held breath. Emeka looks at the faces around him and asks only one thing: read the papers before judgment. He says he will tell the story if they will hear it. The women hesitate, hands on the satchel, eyes on the envelope. The night outside the inn seems to hold its breath. Ada steps forward, token in her palm, and tells him to speak. Emeka tells a story of a woman who once opened her hands and gave with trust. She gave money, food, and tickets. Later, many who received help betrayed her trust. Some pocketed the funds instead of using them for school. Others pretended need and sold the relief for profit. The woman who taught Emeka watched treasures vanish. She learned a bitter lesson: generosity can be stolen. Emeka's voice is quiet and steady as he names the hurt. He says he vowed to be careful. He learned to verify need with his own eyes and not with loud announcements. He says he tried to keep help small and private so greed could not grow around it. The women in the room listen like people hit by rain. The ledger on his lap is filled with initials and careful notes of where gifts went. Steph asks if every helpful hand must hide its face. The others stare at Emeka and the token as if it were a strange blessing. Anger softens at the edges into something like sorrow. Ada thinks of the far shore and of the ticket in the envelope. Emeka asks them to read on and to hold judgment until they know the whole story. Emeka tells them of years away in a place where night lamps burned and books were thick. He learned to measure nights by the hum of his laptop fan. In a sparsely furnished room above a bakery in a university town that smelled of yeast and diesel, he built things out of patience and hunger. He had arrived with a single suitcase, a scholarship letter folded in a brittle envelope, and a memory of a woman who had once taken in boys who had nowhere else to go. He studied with small loans and worked late as the city slept. Lonely nights taught him how to make a tool to help people move cargo and money more fairly. He wrote code in cramped rooms and built an app that smoothed routes for small traders. The app grew useful and then very valuable. Emeka sold it quietly to a company who paid well but asked no fanfare. He took the money and kept silent. The payout made him afraid. He had seen how attention drew people who wanted a piece of kindness for their own pockets. He had also seen how public gifts were turned into performance and shame. He kept his wealth hidden and used it privately to help a few. The ledger grew with the names of students, small grants, and tickets to study abroad. He says his secrecy came from fear and a promise to the woman who taught him: protect the giver and the given by staying quiet. Emeka's voice trembles when he speaks of the cost. He returned to Lagos with money in silence and an old promise in his mouth. The city had not changed its appetite for rumor, but Emeka had learned to move like a man who has seen what attention does to generosity. Wealth, he decided, would be a tool, not a trumpet, and if that meant keeping the sale secret, He would shoulder the quiet and meet the girls himself, one at a time. Months pass after Ada left Lagos for her study under Emeka's scholarship program, and distance becomes part of the story. Ada writes from the far shore about study halls and winter lamps. Her letters come like small boats filled with news and careful thanks. Emeka sends parcels and guarded notes, keeping track in his ledger which parcels reached who and how money was spent. He watches the boat of her life from the quay and writes small counsel in the margins. Study, keep safe, learn the books. The ledger swells with small checkpoints. Emeka thinks of the woman who trained him and the promise he made to keep names quiet. Still, distance stretches more than space. It makes a different kind of closeness. Ada reads by lamplight and thinks of the brass token pressed into her palm the night she first met him. She learns and grows and writes of professors who push her and friends who share bread. Emeka reads her letters like a man who guards a small flame. He marks in the ledger what he has given and how it is used. He tells the women back home that he will cross to the far shore soon to thank those who trained him and to meet the daughter he helped. The news settles over the Lekki women like a soft rain. Emeka arrives in the teaching land with a quiet suitcase and tired hands. He walks to the household that once took him in, carrying thanks in his heart. The family who taught him, old faces that remember his first clumsy steps, greets him like a son. He kneels before Fina, the household's daughter, and thanks them for teaching him to watch how help is handled. The promise he made to their mother sits heavy in his chest. He tells them of ledger pages and brass tokens, of tickets folded into cloth for quiet journeys. Fina hears of Ada's letters and asks about the girl who studies in lamps. Emeka keeps his eyes low but his words steady. He reveals the student ticket and the small ledger full of initials. The household listens and remembers the woman who once gave openly and found only betrayal. Emeka feels bound both by promise and by shame. He wants to protect Ada and those who deserve help, and he also wants to make right the secrecy that has kept faces clouded in rumor. He plans to meet Ada under a pale lamp close to the university so they may speak plainly. Ada waits under a pale lamp by the small university market when Emeka arrives with a careful step. The cold air makes their breath small white moons. They walk the streets between bookstalls and tea sellers, talking like two people who have finally found a place to set a heavy sack down. Winter lamps make the pages of their notes glow soft. Their closeness grows like a plant toward warm light. They laugh at small things and share bread and worry. Emeka tells Ada about the household that trained him and the promise that tied him to secrecy. Ada tells him about nights when she read and thought of the far shore as if it were a map to a new life. Their tenderness grows under the distant sky, but Emeka carries worry. His ties to the household and to Fina wait like a drumbeat at the edge of the street. He does not hide the ledger from Ada, and she rests her hand on his when he shows the small numbers and initials. They walk and plan and dream, but both feel the weight of names unspoken. That night, they let themselves hope while shadows remind them not all stories end with bright lamps. Fina watches from the household window as Emeka walks with Ada. She keeps the kettle hot and counts his steps like beads. Fina had believed in the promise of the household and in Emeka the way a child believes in steady clocks. Now she sees him smiling at another woman and her chest tightens. Her suspicion pricks like a thorn. She remembers the woman who once gave and was betrayed, and she fears the household will lose its honor. The thought of Emeka sharing mornings with Ada feels like a small theft. Fina tries to hold herself calm, but the ache makes her silent steps heavy. She decides to learn who shares her promised man's mornings. She goes to the tea house where Ada studies, where lamps and stories keep people warm. Fina tells herself she will ask, not accuse. She wants truth. The kitchen smells of stew and the household waits as she walks out with a resolve like rain. The quay seems farther now and the future less certain. Fina finds Ada at a small tea house near the market. The tea is bitter and the room is crowded with students. Fina sits across from Ada and asks plainly if she holds Emeka's promise in secret. Her voice is steady but small. Ada looks up and tells of the brass token, the ticket, and the vow of discretion. She speaks of lamps and ledgers and of how Emeka helped without fanfare. She says she never wanted secrets to hurt people. She simply took what was offered and used it to learn. Fina's anger cools into deeper sorrow as the truth settles. She had feared betrayal, but the story is not simple. Emeka had kept things private to protect both giver and receiver. Fina hears not just the token but the weight of promises. The tea grows cold as the two women talk. Fina walks away with a heart that aches but a head that is more clear. She decides she will not be only an echo of promises. Instead, she will find steady footing and learn whether love can be more than a hidden pledge. Fina meets a gentle scholar from the household who tends small books and teaches quietly. He listens to her speak and does not rush to fix things. He offers patient words and waits as her sharp edges soften. He tells stories of work that move step by step, and the calm in his voice soothes the ache she felt for belonging. Fina learns that love can be steady tending rather than the weight of a hidden pledge. She walks with him among the small gardens behind the teaching house and hears the world described in careful lines. The scholar does not demand explanations about Emika. He asks only that she tell her story and be heard. In time, Fina finds a quiet new love that wraps around her days like a warm cloth. The household watches as she leans into a slower rhythm. She sends a brief blessing to Emika, a note that feels like both forgiveness and farewell. Emika reads it with a small smile and a heavy heart. The promises that bound him begin to loosen in honest ways. Emika kneels by a cold river path and holds a simple ring in his hand. The river moves slow and the sky looks thin. He offers Ada the ring and a promise to return and build an honest house for girls by the quay in Lagos. His words are plain and free of theater. Ada hears the promise and thinks of lamps and books and the flat where women once whispered plans. She must choose between staying abroad with her studies and returning to Lagos where secrets once saved gifts. Love and duty tangle inside her like roots. She looks at his steady face and thinks of the ledger with its initials and brass tokens. Emika pledges to lay help open in daylight and name those he aided, to stop hiding behind secrecy. Ada accepts, but only if he vows to make his help public and accountable. She wants honesty to replace hush. Emika agrees and feels a weight lift. The river carries their breaths away. They plan to return to Lagos together and tell the truth so the house they build will stand in daylight, not shadow. They return to Lagos with quiet hope and plans folded into their pockets. The house by the quay waits like an old toothless building in need of repair. Emika speaks to elders and market women and says he will stop hiding gifts. He vows to practice public accounting and to be plain about who is helped. Ada stands beside him, steady as newly planted seed. The Lekki women watch from the flat and gather under fans to see what will happen next. Some wonder if the change can last. Steph circles the plan like a hawk and asks who will guard promises now that secrecy ends. Emika says he will make lists and post them where people can see. Ada wants the house to be for girls who need shelter and learning. They begin to repair the house by the quay and the community murmurs. Some folk hope, some doubt. The plan is big and messy and needed. The women think of their lost sisters and of the brass token that started all this. They wonder if open hands will hold steadier than hidden ones. They put ladders against the old walls and worked until the sun dipped low. The house by the quay began to change under steady hands. They repaired rooms, fixed windows, put in shelves for books and a small room for lessons. Ada taught small classes at first and Emika handled the lists and the ledger in daylight. They invited girls who once schemed in the Lekki flat to come and see. Blessings and whispers mixed in the market. Some called it salvation. Others asked if a house built by a rich man could be trusted. The women who once plotted watched with folded arms, testing every step. The house opened its doors for the first time and the neighborhood peered in. They served stew and told stories about rules and training. Then a messenger arrived with news. Donors who valued anonymity had paused support until the house proved transparent. The news landed like a cold stone. Emika and Ada felt the worry in their chests. The house needed trust and trust needed time and proof. They looked at one another and promised to show the work of daylight. Emika stood in the market square before elders and traders and spoke in a voice that did not rush. He told them who he had helped, how gifts had been used, and why he had once kept things quiet. He explained the ledger and the brass tokens and named some of the students and small projects. The market folk listened, some with softened faces, others with guarded mouths. Gratitude and fear split the crowd. Some thanked him for quiet rescues that helped their children study. Others feared old abuses would return. They worried that once the money flowed, people would find ways to misuse it. Elders called for a public audit and a new process to steady trust. Emika agreed and promised to post records and invite elders to watch. Ada watched as people argued and slowly nodded. The house needed rules as much as warmth. In that crowded square, the decisions felt heavy and right. The crowd dispersed with new questions. The elders would meet again and decide how to hold the house to the light. At first few women stepped forward to apply. Memories of secrecy and shame kept many away. Some remembered how gifts had become gossip and how promises had cracked. Ada and Emika felt the sting. The very people they wanted to help hesitated. The women who once schemed in the Lekki flat muttered that a rich man's gift would vanish as quietly as it came. To face that, Ada organized open market meetings where girls who had benefited before, quietly and honestly, told their true stories. They published simple application forms and clear rules, and the market elders agreed to observe intake. The house posted its hours and took steps to be plain. Still, the first wave of applicants would test the house. Among them were girls with careful needs and some whose stories would press the house's rules to their limits. Ada watched each face and thought of the ledger. She wanted trust to grow, but new wounds do not heal overnight. The house stood ready, its doors open, and the market watched for the first signs of change. 2 breaches shook the house like sudden wind. The first was a young scholarship recipient who used the money for fees and then vanished. She had taken the grant, then chased quick money abroad through unsafe routes. Her last note stopped arriving and the house could not find her. The absence felt like a scar. The second breach involved seed funds for a small tailoring coupe. A woman received the money, then bought a forged travel document and tried to leave the country. The forgery was exposed before she went, and the business never began. Rumor swept the market. Elders hotly debated whether the house should close. Some demanded harder rules, others urged kindness. Ada felt anger and shame for being deceived. Emika felt pain that secrecy alone could not prevent misuse. They called a meeting with staff and elders to design processes to reach the needy without enabling fraud. The house's dream now met the hard face of reality. They would have to build gates that kept out tricks while letting in true need. The task was heavy but necessary. They built new checks and wrote them on a whiteboard for all to see. The house introduced community references. Each applicant must bring 2 witnesses from their neighborhood who knew them by name and need. They made interviews in person, no remote decisions. Scholarships and grants were phased and tied to proof, enrollment confirmation, coursework progress, or receipts for materials. Business funds were released from escrow and paid only for defined expenses. They built short training courses in entrepreneurship to make sure grants had sense. Mentors paired with beneficiaries to guide them and watch progress. Field officers made home visits sometimes, and simple statements of promise were signed. Identity checks used IDs or verified attestations from elders. The women in Lekki watched as these measures closed loopholes and also raised new barriers. A worried girl stood by the door wondering if she would be trusted. The house felt more like a careful workshop now than a warm refuge. Trust would grow in steps, the team said, and the measures might sound cold but they kept hope safe. Ada and her team worked to make the gates fair, not frightening. They held weekly clinics in the market where staff explained the rules, helped fill forms, and coached applicants on business plans. They ran pre-award training on money basics, safety, and civic duty. Completion earned priority. The house partnered with a vocational school and a nearby university to confirm enrollment directly, cutting false claims. A young seamstress completed training, bought a machine with staged funding, and began selling cloth. Her small success drew hopeful eyes. The market buzzed about real results. The council sent a delegation to watch the house's intake, and the first round of vetted beneficiaries moved into steady work. The measures reduced fraud and helped the honest. The community began to test the new system by sending names and questions. The house taught applicants to think like businesspeople and students, not as people seeking quick escapes. The results were slow but real. Ada felt relief in the small wins, but she knew the old hurts did not vanish. The house's name moved further from rumor toward steady work. Months passed and small changes became steady signs. Fewer breaches happened and more good outcomes grew. Graduates returned to the market with work and stable steps. An alumni group formed to support new applicants, serving as guarantors with reputations to lose. Ada began to publish a plain annual report in the square, numbers of beneficiaries, types of support, and short stories, so people could see with their own eyes. A council of elders and alumni formed a conflict panel to help settle disputes. The house's alumni became guarantors, sharing risk and proof of good work. A former laundry woman became a known seamstress who bought fabric in bulk. A scholar who nearly dropped out finished her degree and returned to teach vocational classes for the house. Ada felt both quiet satisfaction and the ache for those lost. The market's elders began to shift from suspicion to guarded approval. Trust rebuilt slowly like wide roots under old trees. The house learned to balance care and rules, showing that mercy could be woven with accountability. 5 years later, the quay filled with familiar faces. The alumni reunion felt like a festival of second chances. Women who once folded maps of departure now traded patterns for cloth and stories for laughter. The seamstress who began with staged funds ran a small workshop and employed others. A former scholarship holder who once left for bad roads had returned and spoke of mistakes and repair. An entrepreneur launched a cooperative and now mentored a new cohort. Fina came as a friend with a small donation from the household that trained Emeka and gave it as a scholarship. Emeka stood at the edge listening as Ada read the 5-year report aloud, clear numbers and names, public accounting for what once had been secret. The elders nodded and some wept. Joy and quiet pride mingled with memories of lost daughters and hard lessons. The reunion closed with a simple pledge: the house would keep working in daylight, teach careful stewardship, and let alumni lead. The crowd dispersed under Lecky lamps. Women who once feared a hidden hand now walked openly, naming who helped and promising to pay it forward. The brass token rested in a small box at the house, a reminder of the night that began it all and of how careful truth can turn sorrow into steady hope.